In this video, I want to talk about October bass fishing. And not only are we going to talk a little bit about what happens in the month of October, but I'm also going to give you my top 4 baits, the ones that I use a lot during this month. For me, I stick pretty shallow in the month of October, and so you will see kind of that reflected in all the baits that I'm about to talk about. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by Omnia Fishing, and specifically the Omnia Pro app. One of my absolute favorite features that the Pro app has is its waypoint function. This is something that is really unique, and it's something that has actually replaced me keeping a lot of notes and Excel sheets like I used to do back in the day. Anytime I catch a fish, no matter what lake I am fishing, I always pull up my Omnia app and I will actually make a waypoint in that app. And what Omnia's app does is it actually takes all the current conditions that you are experiencing and it will automatically attribute all that to that specific waypoint. That way I can look at waypoints and kind of see what was happening when I was catching fish in that specific area. Now, not only that, something that is really cool that Omnia's Pro app is now doing is that you can actually import all of your waypoints from your different units into the Omnia app, and it will take data from up to 10 years in the past and actually, again, attribute all your weather conditions that happened on that day that you made that waypoint to all those waypoints. It just provides you with a lot more information, which can help you to catch a lot more bass when you get out there on the water. So if you guys want to check out that Omnia Pro app, I'm going to leave some links down below in the description. I greatly appreciate it. All right, now quickly before we get into the October baits, I do want to talk a little bit about what you see happen a lot in the month of October. September and October are really kind of a big month of change where you kind of go from that summer hot weather to kind of it really starting to cool down. So in the month of September, I talked a little bit about the lake transitioning and actually the fall turnover. And depending on where you live in the country, you will see the fall turnover happening a lot in the month of October as well. And one of the biggest things that turnover really does is it really just kind of spreads out the fish. The fish can really kind of be anywhere. And so what I have learned over the last several years is that for me, I have found the best success really just covering a lot of water in shallow water. Sure, you can catch them deep, you can catch them offshore in the month of October, but I tend to have more fun and I tend to just catch some better quality fish by sticking shallow and covering a ton of water. Now, one of the most important things to also understand about the month of October is that you have a lot of bait fish everywhere in the lakes that you fish. The lakes, the rivers, no matter where you are, you have a lot of the young of the year bait, and it can be absolutely everywhere. You will see it out on the main lake, you know, dead out there in the middle of the river channel. You will also see it way back in the backs of creeks. So this time of the year, this can be kind of hard. You hear a lot of guys say find the bait and find the bass. During the month of October and into fall, there's so much bait everywhere that bass can really be anywhere. Kind of like I said, they really can be spread out this time of the year. So I like to pick up baits that I can cover a lot of water in, and that's what I'm about to talk about right now. So let's get into probably my top bait for the month of October, and that is a whopper plopper or Chopo style bait. This by far is probably the bait that I have tied up with me the most in the month of October. And like I just talked about several times, I'm gonna fish this thing everywhere in shallow water. So I will fish this thing in the back of a pocket. I will fish it kind of in the middle of pockets. I will fish it out on the main lake. I will fish it around grass flats, around docks. I will fish this bait absolutely everywhere. And the big thing with this bait is I'm really not always trying to find a pattern. I'm not trying to say, hey, the fish are in the second, third of the creek arms around docks. You don't always see that a lot this time of the year. It's really about just catching the resident fish in a little area. So I might catch one on a main lake point, around a grass patch, and then work my way into a creek arm where I catch one on a dock halfway back. And then I catch one in the very back on a stump. that is what you do a lot. At least that's what I have had a lot of success with when fishing the plopper style bait. Now, one thing that I've also learned is that during this month, you know, you hear a lot of guys talk about fishing topwaters, really kind of when you have cloudy conditions out. During this month, I feel like you can catch a bass on a topwater throughout the entire day. I kind of see that a lot during the summer as well. But those days that you do have darker days, cloudy days, rainy days, you have those low front systems, low pressure systems that are moving in, those can be phenomenal days to go out there and just, again, cover a ton of water with a whopper plopper. Now, the big thing with whopper ploppers is not kind of overcomplicating them. You know, there's a lot of different whopper ploppers out there on the market. The two that I stick to are the original, the whopper plopper, and the Berkley Chapo. Now you can see that they come in a lot of different sizes. You know, this is a whopper plopper 130. You have the 110. The 110 is probably the one that I fish the most. You have a 90 size. You have a 75 size. You also have ones that are bigger, that are actually made for like muskie, but you can catch bass on them as well. They're even bigger than this. I think it's like a 180. So there's a lot of different sizes. Now, for me, when I go out there in the month of fall, the two that I probably throw the most are the 110 and the 90. Now, these two baits, especially the 90, I want to talk about here in just a minute. The 90 is a really different plopper style bait. All the other baits, the 110, the 130, even the little 75, these baits all have a really aggressive sound to them. I mean, they kind of are named after their sound, the whopper plopper sound, and they really do have a chugging, plopping sound that is very aggressive. Now, I start a lot with the 110, and if I'm fishing around a little bit bigger fish, I'll step up to the 130. If I'm around smaller fish, I will go down to the 75. And I'm looking for bass that want to hit that aggressive noise. Now, every now and then during this month, and this actually happens throughout the year if you get on a good whopper plopper bite, you will have fish that come up and you will see them either hit this bait and not get hooked up, or they will just kind of boil on the bait. You will literally just see a boil on the bait, and again, you're not getting hooked up. Or you will see that there are certain days out there where you are simply not landing a high ratio of the fish that you are hooking. It's like that they're not getting it that well. Anytime I experience those situations, that is when I step down to this little whopper plopper 90. And I fish this bait an awful lot. And the biggest thing about the 90 that's different than all of these baits, even the little 75 that's actually smaller than this bait, although it's a fatter bait, is that this one has a very subtle plop to it. It is not nearly as aggressive as the other whopper ploppers or even the other Chapo style baits. To me, this is really kind of a bait, this 90 size, that's really in its own category. So it's a little bit smaller, as you can see, but it has a very subtle action to it. And when those fish are not hitting a whopper plopper that well, sometimes I will back it up with a 90 and find out that they hit that 90 a lot better. So I like to carry a lot of 90s. Now, when it comes to colors, keep things just really simple. I have kind of your shad pattern type ones, your bones, your shad. I have things that are going to mimic bluegill, where you kind of have a little red or orange on the bottom. I do like that. And then I also have black. And black is one that I tend to throw a lot in the fall, especially on those days where it is dark, it is raining, it is overcast. You tend to get those a lot in the fall. Those can be such good days to just pick up a whopper plopper and go down the bank. Now, over the years, I have found that there are simply days in the month of October where the bass just don't want to hit a topwater bite. So what I do in that situation is I'm going to fish a lot of the exact same areas that I talked about with that whopper plopper, but instead of throwing a plopper, I'm gonna throw a square bill. This is the second of the 4 baits, and a square bill, man, it is such a good bait year round, but in the fall, this is a workhorse for me. I will pick this thing up often and just, again, like the whopper plopper, I'm fishing this thing everywhere. The only difference between the whopper plopper and the square bill is this is obviously a subsurface bait. There are just days where bass don't want to head a topwater. Maybe you've had a high pressure system come through and the bass are just kind of a little bit more lethargic. You can still get them to react a lot of times with a square bill. Now, what I talked about earlier was how much bait that you have in the water. And that is absolutely true. So I know that for a lot of us, we've always been taught to match the hatch. And that can definitely be true. It can even be true in the fall. But sometimes I really think that in the fall, when you have so much bait in the water, and especially shad, you know, if you live on lakes that have threadfin shad and gizzard shad, if you pick up a bait that is a shad colored bait, it just kind of blends in with all the bait. I remember this day that I was fishing a number of years ago. It was a tournament day, and I was fishing a shad colored square bill in the fall. I was going down the bank and I was catching some fish, but I just felt like I should be catching them a little bit better. And what I ended up doing, picking up a chartreuse blackback crankbait just like this one right here, and it made a big difference on the number of bites that I was getting. It also made a big difference on how these bass were eating it. It seemed like they were getting it a lot better. And I wasn't fishing like really, really muddy water. It was stained water, but it wasn't like it was super muddy, which is where a lot of people are going to pick up the chartreuse color. It's just that it stood out to the bass. And I really, really believe that sometimes in the fall, actually kind of mismatching the hatch will lead to a few extra bites. Now, not only is color important, but one of the probably the most important things when it comes to square bill fishing is finding those days where bass are hitting baits that are silent, like this one, where there's no rattles or nothing in it, and days where they want something that is a lot more aggressive. As you can hear, there's a lot more noise in that. This is by far, to me, the biggest turnoff to a bass on days is having a bait that has a lot of rattles. Now, there are days, kind of those high pressure or those low pressure days, like we talked about it when it's raining out. Sometimes when you have just really muddy water, you do want a bait that has a lot of sound. But I find more times than not during the month of October, I end up fishing a lot of these silent baits. I feel like they just happen to get more bites. They are more natural, and it just seems like I catch more fish. Now, when it comes to square bills, I do want to lump two different crankbaits into the square bill category because I use them in a lot of the exact same situations this time of the year. And one is this bait right here. This is the Strike King Hybrid Hunter. This bait does not get as deep as a lot of your typical square bills do. A lot of square bills, you know, like the KVD 1.5 might get 4 to 6 foot. This is gonna be more like that 2 to 4 foot zone. But this bait not only comes through grass cover really well, but I have actually fished this around a lot of wood cover and even down rock banks and caught a ton of fish to it. And it's just a little bit different. It has more of a rolling action to it. And I think that that rolling action can just be really good at times. Like I think that it can make a difference on the number of fish you catch. And if you are fishing in an area, or maybe you're fishing on a lake where there's a lot of bad guys throwing a square bill, this is a bait that is just a little bit different. It just looks a little bit different. It comes through cover a little bit different. And sometimes being a little bit different can really help you to catch more bass. Now, the other bait that I want to lump into the square bill category is a little Berkley Fritz side. This little junior specifically is the one that I throw an awful lot, especially in the fall time, and October is no different. And it's kind of similar to the Strike King bait, where I like to throw this in a lot of those situations where I feel like a lot of anglers are throwing square bills. If a lot of anglers out there throwing square bills, a lot of guys are throwing kind of that similar size square bill, something like this, a 1.5 size. You know, Lucky Craft has one that's the exact same size. Almost every company out there has a square bill that is this size, and it is very popular and it catches fish. But sometimes those a little subtle flat side crankbait like that Berkley Fritz side, man, it can be deadly in October, and you can fish behind other guys that are fishing square bills and still catch them. So those are two baits I just kind of wanted to highlight because I think that they can be that much better than your typical square bill in October. Now let's talk about bait number 3, and this is my big fish bait. This is what I'm gonna use a lot come the month of October, and that is some sort of glide bait. Right here in my hand, I have 2 different glide baits. This glide bait here is $80. It's a little CTM glide bait. Very good little glide bait. This one right here is, I believe, $59. This is a Spro KGB. They are both, you know, expensive as far as lures go, but they are fairly inexpensive as far as some of these glide baits go. I mean, glide baits can range. I mean, this right here, this is a clutch darter. This is a $250 bait. I paid my own money for this bait right here. So there's a lot of different glide baits out there on the market. My suggestion is just to pick up a couple and just get really good at fishing a couple. You know, one that's readily available is the KGB glide. This Spro KGB version is readily available. You can find it everywhere, and I will leave links down below for all these. And it's a good bait. I've caught a lot of fish on the gizzard shad color. I've also caught a lot of fish on the bone color. These are great baits. And similar to the Whopper Plopper, similar to the square bill, I'm really gonna fish this thing everywhere. I'm gonna fish it alongside a dock. I'm gonna fish it in the back of a creek next to a laydown log. I'm gonna fish it on the main lake on a bluff. I'm gonna fish it on the main lake around some grass. Again, bass can be a little bit of everywhere, but I am really kind of targeting bigger fish with these baits. Now, something that I really, really like about a glide bait is that not only can you catch big fish on it, but you can simply find fish with this bait. And I've talked about this several times before, but I think that this is one of the most unique things about a glide bait is it helps you to locate fish, because even if you do not catch fish, you will see areas on the lake where a lot of fish are simply following this bait. For example, you may go down a riprap bank, you're throwing a glide bait, you may not see anything, then you go down another riprap bank, and all of a sudden, every other cast, you see a bass following your bait. And although you're not catching anything, you may have just found a stretch of riprap that you can come back to with your square bill and absolutely start catching them. So use the glide bait not only as a fish catching machine, but as a fish finding machine. It can really find you some big wads of fish in the month of October, and you have a really good chance at catching some big ones. There is a lot of big fish that are moving shallow this time of the year. And anytime I have big fish in shallow water, one of the baits that I am going to throw is a glide bait. It just gets those bigger than average bites. Now, the next lure is one that pretty much is in almost every one of my monthly lure videos. And it's that good of a bait. It's that simple of a bait, and it just catches them everywhere, and that is a Texas rig. The good old Texas rig. There are days, all these baits that I talked about are moving baits. There's days out there where bass are not wanting to move a lot to get your bait. And so actually in this video right here, I pretty much just picked up a Texas rig for about a 6-hour day, and I just went fishing on a lake that I hadn't seen for a long time, over 6 years, and ended up catching a pretty good bag of fish just simply fishing the Texas rig. So I'm gonna leave that video right here if you wanna check out more about a Texas rig. All right guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.